On the afternoon of October 26, 1942, the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise steamed 200 miles northeast of the Santa Cruz Islands in the South Pacific. At 11:21 a.m., Japanese dive bombers from the carrier Zuikaku pushed through American fighter cover, 3 Type 99. VAL dive bombers reached attack position. At 11:44 a.m., the first bomb struck Enterprise's flight deck just forward of the aft elevator. The 550-pound armor-piercing bomb penetrated 3 decks before detonating in crew berthing spaces. 39 men died instantly. 2 minutes later, a second bomb hit near the forward elevator. A third bomb struck moments after. By noon, Enterprise had taken 3 direct bomb hits and was burning. Radio Tokyo announced that evening that the American carrier had been sunk. The claim was broadcast throughout Japan. Naval headquarters in Tokyo marked Enterprise as destroyed on their operational charts. It was the second time in 4 months that Japanese forces had officially declared USS Enterprise sunk. She had been destroyed at the Battle of the Eastern Solomons in August. Before the war ended, Japanese propaganda would claim her sinking a third time. Enterprise never sank. By the war's conclusion in August 1945, she had earned 20 battle stars, more than any other United States warship in history. The story of how one aircraft carrier survived the entire Pacific War, while most of her sisters went to the bottom, requires examining not luck, but engineering, damage control, and the decisions made by the men who sailed her. USS Enterprise, designated CV-6, was laid down at Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia on July 16, 1934. She was the second ship to carry the name, following a schooner that had served in the Continental Navy. Her keel represented the 6th aircraft carrier hull, authorized by the United States Navy. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 had limited American carrier tonnage to 135,000 tons total. Enterprise and her sister ship Yorktown were designed to maximize combat capability within treaty restrictions. The specifications were straightforward. Enterprise displaced 19,800 tons standard and 25,500 tons fully loaded. Overall length measured 827 feet. The flight deck stretched 802 feet long and 86 feet wide. 4-geared steam turbines generated 120,000 shaft horsepower, driving the ship to a maximum speed of 32.5 knots. Range at 15 knots extended to 12,500 nautical miles. Her aircraft complement initially consisted of 36 dive bombers, 36 torpedo bombers, and 18 fighters, a total of 90 aircraft. Later, wartime modifications would reduce capacity to approximately 80 aircraft, but improve defensive armament significantly. Enterprise was launched on October 3, 1936. Her sponsor was Luli Swanson, wife of the Secretary of the Navy, Claude Swanson. The carrier was commissioned on May 12, 1938, with Captain Newton H. White, Jr. commanding. Initial shakedown cruises identified no significant problems. By early 1939, Enterprise had joined the Pacific Fleet based at San Diego. The carrier's early service focused on training operations and fleet exercises. Her air group practiced carrier landings, formation flying, and simulated combat scenarios. The Navy was developing doctrine for carrier warfare, but most senior officers still viewed battleships as the decisive naval weapon. Carriers were considered reconnaissance platforms and support vessels. Enterprise's first 2 years of service provided no indication she would become the most combat-decorated ship in American naval history. On December 7, 1941, Enterprise was approximately 200 miles west of Pearl Harbor. She had departed Hawaii on November 28 to deliver Marine Fighter Squadron 211 to Wake Island. The mission completed, Enterprise was returning to Pearl Harbor. Her air group consisted of 18 Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters, 37 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers, and 14 Douglas TBD Devastator torpedo bombers. At dawn, Enterprise launched 18 SBD Dauntlesses for routine patrol ahead of the ship. At 8:06 a.m. Hawaii time, the first Japanese bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. Enterprise's patrol aircraft began arriving over Oahu around 8:15 a.m., flying directly into the Japanese attack. 5 SBD Dauntlesses were shot down. 4 pilots were killed. The carrier herself avoided attack entirely. Her position 200 miles offshore had placed her beyond Japanese reconnaissance range. By the evening of December 7th, Enterprise was one of only 3 American aircraft carriers in the Pacific. USS Lexington had been delivering aircraft to Midway. USS Saratoga was in San Diego. The battleship fleet at Pearl Harbor had been destroyed. American naval strategy in the Pacific would now depend entirely on carriers. Enterprise's survival on December 7th was circumstance. Her survival over the next 45 months would require something different. The carrier's first combat operation came in February 1942. Vice Admiral William Halsey, flying his flag aboard Enterprise, led Task Force 8 in raids against Japanese-held islands in the Marshall and Gilbert Islands. On February 1st, Enterprise aircraft struck Kwajalein, Votya, and Malawelap. The raids achieved limited material damage but provided crucial combat experience for pilots and demonstrated American willingness to take offensive action. More importantly, the operations tested carrier strike doctrine under combat conditions. In April 1942, Enterprise supported the Doolittle raid on Tokyo. She did not launch the 16 Army Air Force B-25 bombers. That mission fell to USS Hornet. Enterprise provided fighter cover for the task force and stood ready to defend Hornet if Japanese forces discovered the operation. The task force departed safely. No American carriers were lost. The Battle of Midway, on June 4, 1942, tested Enterprise against the Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier striking force. American intelligence had broken Japanese naval codes. Admiral Chester Nimitz knew that 4 Japanese fleet carriers were approaching Midway Atoll. The United States could field 3 carriers: Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet. The Japanese brought Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, supported by battleships and cruisers. American carriers carried 233 aircraft total. Japanese carriers carried approximately 248. Enterprise launched her first strike at 7:06 a.m. on June 4th. 33 SBD Dauntless dive bombers, 14 TBD Devastator torpedo bombers, and 10 F-4F Wildcat fighters departed the flight deck. Navigation errors separated the strike groups. The torpedo squadron found the Japanese carriers first. All 14 TBD Devastators were shot down. Every crew member except one was killed. Ensign George Gay survived by hiding under a floating seat cushion for 30 hours until rescue. At 10:22 a.m., Enterprise's dive bombers reached the Japanese carrier force. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey led 33 SBD Dauntlesses into attack position. The Japanese carriers, Kaga, Akagi, and Soryu, were recovering aircraft from earlier strikes. Their flight decks were crowded with fueled and armed planes. McCluskey's squadron pushed over into their dives. Within 6 minutes, all 3 Japanese carriers were burning. Bombs had detonated fueled aircraft, ignited aviation gasoline, and set off armed ordnance. Kaga sank that evening. Akagi and Soryu followed within hours. The 4th Japanese carrier, Hiryu, counterattacked. At 5:03 p.m., Japanese dive bombers struck Yorktown. 3 bombs hit the carrier, forcing her crew to abandon ship. Enterprise continued operations. Her aircraft located Hiryu at 5:00 p.m. At 6:45 p.m., 24 Enterprise dive bombers attacked. 4 bombs struck Hiryu. The carrier burned through the night and sank the following morning. The Battle of Midway cost Japan 4 fleet carriers and 248 aircraft. American losses totaled 1 carrier and 147 aircraft. Enterprise had sunk 2 enemy carriers and survived without damage. The victory at Midway shifted strategic initiative to the United States. Japanese offensive capability was broken. The question became whether American forces could sustain offensive operations across the vast Pacific. The answer would be determined at Guadalcanal. On August 7, 1942, United States Marines landed on Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. The objective was Henderson Field, a Japanese airstrip under construction. Marine forces secured the airfield on August 8. The Japanese responded with major naval and air counterattacks. Enterprise, now part of Task Force 61 under Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, provided air cover for the invasion force. The Battle of the Eastern Solomons occurred on August 24, 1942. Japanese forces attempted to reinforce Guadalcanal with a troop convoy protected by carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku. At 4:50 p.m., Japanese dive bombers from Shokaku penetrated American fighter cover. Enterprise maneuvered radically, turning hard to port. The first bomb missed, exploding 15 feet off the port bow. The second bomb struck the flight deck near the aft elevator at 5:14 p.m. The 550-pound bomb penetrated to the third deck before detonating. 74 men were killed. The third bomb hit at 5:17 p.m., striking the flight deck near the number 2 elevator. The explosion killed 35 more men and jammed the elevator in the raised position. Enterprise's damage control teams responded immediately. Repair parties sealed ruptured fuel lines, fought fires in berthing spaces, and worked to restore flight operations. By 5:46 p.m., 32 minutes after the first bomb hit, the flight deck was operational again. Enterprise recovered her aircraft and withdrew south for emergency repairs. Radio Tokyo announced that evening that the American carrier had been sunk. Enterprise reached Pearl Harbor on September 10th. Repair crews worked continuously for 9 days. On September 19th, Enterprise departed Pearl Harbor and returned to combat operations. The carrier's damage control success at Eastern Solomons reflected design and training. Enterprise carried extensive firefighting equipment, foam generators, portable pumps, and carbon dioxide systems. Watertight compartmentation limited flooding from any single hit. Damage control parties trained constantly, running drills for fire, flooding, and battle damage scenarios. When bombs struck, these teams knew exactly what to do. They had done it dozens of times in practice. October 1942 brought Enterprise back to the Solomon Islands. Japanese forces were making another major push to retake Guadalcanal. The Battle of Santa Cruz occurred on October 26th. Enterprise and Hornet faced Japanese carriers Shokaku, Zuikaku, and Zueho. At 9:10 a.m., Enterprise launched her strike. 8 fighters, 3 dive bombers, and 7 torpedo bombers. The strike damaged carrier Zueho. Japanese counterattacks followed. At 11:44 a.m., the first bomb struck Enterprise's flight deck. The explosion killed 39 men and started fires on the hangar deck. The second bomb hit at 11:46 a.m., destroying the forward elevator. The third bomb struck moments later. A fourth bomb was a dud. It penetrated the flight deck but failed to detonate and exited through the side of the ship. At noon, Enterprise was on fire and listing. Hornet, meanwhile, had taken multiple torpedo and bomb hits and was dead in the water. Enterprise's crew again demonstrated exceptional damage control. Fire parties extinguished blazes within 20 minutes. Repair crews patched the flight deck with steel plates welded directly over bomb craters. By 1:27 p.m., less than 2 hours after the attacks, Enterprise was recovering aircraft again. The carrier withdrew south, operating her aircraft throughout the retreat. Hornet was abandoned and sunk by Japanese destroyers that night. Enterprise survived. Radio Tokyo announced on October 27th that Enterprise had been sunk at Santa Cruz. Japanese naval intelligence marked the carrier as destroyed for the second time. The following day, Enterprise aircraft were bombing Japanese positions on Guadalcanal. Tokyo's announcements created confusion in Japanese planning. Intelligence officers reported the carrier destroyed. Combat reports indicated she was still operating. The contradiction was never satisfactorily resolved. Some Japanese commanders began referring to Enterprise as the Grey Ghost, a ship that refused to die. The nickname was accurate. Enterprise had survived 4 major carrier battles in 1942: Midway, Eastern Solomons, Santa Cruz, and the naval battles around Guadalcanal in November. By December 1942, she was the only American carrier operational in the Pacific. Saratoga had been torpedoed twice and was under repair. Lexington had been sunk at the Coral Sea. Yorktown had sunk at Midway. Hornet was lost at Santa Cruz. Wasp had been torpedoed and sunk in September. Enterprise was alone. The carrier continued operations throughout 1943. New Essex-class carriers began joining the fleet. Essex herself, followed by Yorktown, second ship with the name, Intrepid, Hornet, second ship with the name, and others. By early 1944, the fast carrier task force included more than a dozen fleet carriers. Enterprise was no longer irreplaceable, but she remained in constant action. The carrier participated in the raids on Truk in February 1944. The Japanese naval base was heavily defended. Enterprise aircraft sank 2 light cruisers, 4 destroyers, and more than 30 merchant ships. The Marianas Campaign followed in June 1944. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea on June 19th, Enterprise aircraft were part of the massive fighter defense that destroyed more than 350 Japanese aircraft in what pilots called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japanese carrier aviation never recovered from these losses. In October 1944, Enterprise supported the invasion of the Philippines. At the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history, Enterprise aircraft sank the Japanese carrier Zuikaku. This was the same carrier that had attacked Enterprise at Santa Cruz 2 years earlier. Enterprise also contributed to sinking battleship Musashi, one of the 2 largest battleships ever built. The kamikaze threat emerged during the Philippines campaign. Japanese pilots deliberately crashed their aircraft into American ships. Enterprise was struck by a kamikaze on May 14, 1945, off Okinawa. The aircraft hit the forward elevator, killing 14 men. Fires broke out on the flight deck and hangar deck. Damage control teams extinguished the fires within 30 minutes. The carrier continued flight operations with minimal interruption. By August 1945, Enterprise had been in continuous combat operations for 45 months. She had participated in every major carrier engagement in the Pacific except the Coral Sea, where she had been in port for maintenance. Her aircraft had sunk or damaged hundreds of enemy ships and destroyed more than 900 enemy aircraft confirmed. She had steamed more than 275,000 miles. Her crew had grown from 2,200 at commissioning to more than 3,400 by war's end as anti-aircraft batteries expanded and aircraft complement increased. The carrier's survival was not miraculous. It was engineering. Enterprise's Yorktown-class design incorporated lessons from earlier carriers. Watertight compartmentation was extensive. Damage control equipment was comprehensive. The crew was trained to respond to battle damage immediately and effectively. When bombs hit, fires were fought, flooding was controlled, and repairs began within minutes. The carrier's machinery was robust. Even with battle damage, the engineering plant continued operating. Speed and maneuverability allowed Enterprise to evade many attacks that hit slower, less agile ships. Statistical analysis supports this assessment. Enterprise was hit by bombs or kamikazes 6 times during the war. Each time, damage control restored the ship to operational status within hours, or at most, days. Other carriers hit with similar damage were lost. Yorktown sank after 3 bomb hits at Midway, though she also took 2 torpedo hits later. Hornet sank after multiple bomb and torpedo hits at Santa Cruz. Wasp sank after torpedo damage in September 1942. Enterprise survived comparable or greater damage through superior damage control execution. The human element mattered. Captain Osborne Hardison commanded Enterprise from April 1941 through November 1942, including the carrier's most desperate battles. His emphasis on damage control training proved critical when bombs struck. Captain Samuel Ginder took command in November 1942 and continued this focus. Rear Admiral Thomas Kincaid, who commanded Enterprise's task force in 1942, later wrote that the carrier's damage control teams were the finest I ever observed in the United States Navy. Multiple commanding officers and thousands of crew members rotated through Enterprise during the war, but the damage control culture remained constant. By September 1945, Enterprise was the most decorated ship in United States naval history. Her 20 battle stars exceeded any battleship, cruiser, or destroyer. No other carrier came close. Saratoga earned 7, Essex earned 13. Enterprise's battle star count represented participation in virtually every significant naval engagement in the Pacific War. The carrier's post-war fate proved anticlimactic, and to many veterans, deeply disappointing. Enterprise returned to New York in December 1945. Public efforts began immediately to preserve the ship as a memorial. The Navy declined. The official position held that Enterprise was worn out from continuous combat operations and that preservation would be prohibitively expensive. The real reason may have been simpler. The Navy needed funding for new construction, and maintaining museum ships competed with budget priorities. Enterprise was decommissioned on February 17, 1947. She was placed in the reserve fleet at Bayonne, New Jersey. Public campaigns to save the carrier continued for 8 years. Former crew members raised funds. Congressional representatives introduced bills to authorize Enterprise's preservation. All efforts failed. On July 1, 1958, Enterprise was sold to Lipset Corporation for scrap. Demolition began in Kearney, New Jersey. By the end of 1960, the most decorated ship in American naval history had been completely dismantled. Only a few artifacts survived: the ship's bell, the nameplate, and scattered equipment pieces preserved by veterans and museums. The 9th United States Navy ship to carry the name Enterprise was commissioned in November 1961. The world's first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, designated CVN-65. She inherited the legacy, if not the physical structure. The 10th Enterprise, CVN-80, is currently under construction and scheduled for commissioning in 2030. The original Enterprise's combat record remains unmatched. 20 battle stars, more than 900 enemy aircraft destroyed. Participation in Midway, Eastern Solomons, Santa Cruz, Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, and dozens of smaller engagements. Declared sunk 3 times by enemy propaganda. Never actually sunk. The mathematics of her service are stark. From December 1941 through August 1945, Enterprise was in combat operations for approximately 130 weeks out of a possible 196 weeks. She spent 2/3 of World War II actively fighting. The carrier's survival despite multiple bomb hits, kamikaze strikes, and 4 years of continuous operations demonstrated principles that remain relevant in naval warfare. Damage control capability matters as much as offensive firepower. Crew training determines whether battle damage becomes catastrophic or merely an operational delay, and ship design must prioritize survivability alongside combat capability. Enterprise proved all 3 principles under the most demanding conditions imaginable. When Radio Tokyo announced for the 3rd time that Enterprise had been sunk, the carrier was launching strikes against Japanese positions in the Philippines. The pattern held until the war's end. The enemy claimed she was destroyed. Enterprise continued fighting. The Gray Ghost earned her name.